Elon Musk destroys TV host. His reply stuns the entire nation. Imagine sitting at home, watching what was supposed to be a routine interview, only to realize that something far more intense was unfolding before your eyes. The air crackled with tension, the kind that made every person in the room sit up just a little straighter. On one side sat Elon Musk, the visionary who had revolutionized industries, a man known for his bold decisions and unapologetic views. On the other side, a sharp and relentless TV host, determined to challenge him at every turn. She had come prepared, ready to put him on the defensive, to expose what she believed were contradictions in his actions. The stage was set for what many thought would be just another high-profile grilling of a billionaire. But what happened next was something no one saw coming. From the very first question, it was clear. This wasn't going to be an ordinary exchange. The host wasted no time, cutting straight to the controversy. Her tone was firm, her words sharp. She accused Musk of being reckless, of using his power to reshape public opinion for his own benefit. She called him out for his decisions, the mass layoffs, the controversial statements, the radical changes to Twitter. The audience watched closely, waiting for Musk to justify himself, to push back, maybe even stumble under pressure. But he didn't. Instead, he did something that shifted the entire dynamic of the conversation. Rather than defend himself, Musk leaned forward slightly, his expression unreadable, and posed a simple yet devastating question in response. A question that made the host hesitate for just a fraction of a second. A question that forced everyone watching to reconsider what they thought they knew. And in that moment, the power in the room shifted. What did he say that left the host speechless? And why did this moment change everything? The air in the studio felt heavier now. The lights were bright, the kind that made every expression, every reaction, impossible to hide. The title of the show, Unfiltered Truth, glowed in the background, a reminder that this wasn't just an ordinary conversation. The audience sat in silent anticipation, their eyes locked on the two central figures. On one side, Elon Musk, sitting with his usual calmness, his posture relaxed, but his gaze sharp. On the other, the host, a seasoned journalist known for her no-nonsense approach. She had built a career on exposing powerful figures, making them squirm under the weight of their own contradictions. Tonight, she was here to do just that. Without hesitation, she leaned forward and went straight for the attack. Elon, you've built an empire on innovation, but lately, people aren't calling you a visionary anymore. They're calling you reckless. Some say you've become a man obsessed with control, of technology, of business, even of public opinion. You took over Twitter and fired thousands of employees overnight. You reinstated controversial figures on the platform. You've made statements that have shaken investors and politicians alike. Some argue that you're no longer pushing humanity forward. You're pushing your own agenda. So tell me, Elon, what do you say to those who believe you are no longer a force for progress, but a threat to democracy itself? The words cut through the room like a blade. The audience held their breath, waiting for Musk to react. This was the moment many had been waiting for. The moment he would have to explain himself, to justify his actions, maybe even admit to his mistakes. But he didn't rush to answer. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, studying the host, almost as if he were analyzing the question itself, rather than preparing a response. Then, in the calmest voice possible, he asked, "Who are these people you're referring to?" A murmur rippled through the crowd. The host blinked, caught off guard for just a second, but quickly recovered. "The public," she said firmly. "The people who once admired you but now question your true motives." Musk gave a small nod, his expression unreadable. "The public," he repeated, "or what they've been told to believe." For the first time, the energy in the room shifted. The audience exchanged glances. The host straightened in her seat, determined not to lose control. She let out a faint, almost amused smile. "Are you suggesting that there's some grand effort to manipulate how people see you?" Musk didn't flinch. "I'm suggesting that people should ask why they believe what they believe. That's all." The simplicity of his words carried more weight than any lengthy explanation ever could. For a brief moment, the host hesitated, choosing her next move carefully. This was not going as expected. She had prepared for defensiveness, for Musk to explain himself, maybe even deny the accusations outright. But instead, he was making her defend the premise of her own question. This was no longer just a debate about his decisions. This was about something much bigger, the way narratives are shaped, the way information is controlled. And for the first time, it wasn't Musk who was on the defensive. It was her. A strange kind of silence settled over the studio, the kind that only happens when something completely unexpected unfolds. The host had come prepared for this conversation, armed with tough questions, sharp comebacks, and the confidence that she could keep Musk on the defensive. But somehow, in just a few sentences, he had shifted the weight of the conversation. He wasn't scrambling to justify himself. He wasn't backing down under pressure. Instead, he had done something far more powerful. He had made her position the one that needed explaining. She squared her shoulders, refusing to let the moment slip away. "Are you saying there's an agenda behind how the public sees you?" she asked, her tone firm, laced with skepticism. It was a challenge, an attempt to corner him into making a claim she could dismantle. But Musk wasn't biting. He leaned back slightly, his voice steady and calm. "I'm not saying anything. I'm just wondering, why is questioning the status quo always treated as dangerous?" A few members of the audience murmured. The host's lips pressed together, just for a second. But Musk caught it. He knew she had expected a fight, a debate over his actions. Instead, he had turned the conversation into something else entirely, something bigger. She took a breath, regaining control. "It's not about questioning Elon," she said carefully. "It's about responsibility. When you control platforms like Twitter, X, your decisions affect millions of people. That's not just questioning the status quo. That's power." Musk nodded slightly, acknowledging the point. "You're right," he said simply. "It is power." His voice was even, unreadable, but the weight of his words hung in the air. "But the real question is, who has been controlling the narrative up until now?" The room went still. It was subtle, but the shift in energy was undeniable. Until now, the host had been leading the discussion, driving the questions, steering the conversation exactly where she wanted it to go. But Musk had just flipped everything upside down. He was no longer defending himself. He was asking something much larger, something that reached beyond him, beyond the interview, beyond even the media itself. The host blinked, but she didn't let the moment linger. "That sounds a lot like a conspiracy theory," she said, her tone sharp, precise. "Are you suggesting that mainstream media, the government, the so-called elites, they're all working together to control what people think?" Musk didn't react right away. He let the question settle, let the audience feel the weight of it. Then, finally, he said, "I think history has shown us that those in power rarely give up control willingly." The response was so simple, so undeniable, that for the first time, the host hesitated. She knew she couldn't outright dismiss it. After all, history was full of examples. Governments, corporations, entire industries that had shaped public opinion for their own interests. But she also couldn't let him dictate the conversation. She had to regain control. "So what are you saying?" she asked, crossing her arms. "That you're the one freeing people from that control? That buying Twitter was some noble mission to save free speech?" Musk's expression didn't change, but there was something in his eyes, a quiet confidence, a certainty that made it clear he wasn't shaken by her words. "I'm saying people should be allowed to hear all sides," he answered, "and decide for themselves." That was it. No long-winded speech, no dramatic defense. Just that simple, undeniable statement. And yet, somehow, it was more powerful than anything else he could have said. The host wasn't done yet. She leaned forward slightly, her voice lowering. "And what if the side they choose to believe is full of lies? What if misinformation spreads? Don't you have a responsibility to stop that?" Musk met her gaze without blinking. "The truth does not fear scrutiny," he said evenly. "Only lies need to be controlled." The audience reacted this time, not with cheers or applause, but with something deeper, a shift in awareness, a realization. The host exhaled slowly, clearly frustrated. "That's an easy thing to say when you're the one deciding what gets amplified on your platform," she countered. "You talk about free speech, but at the end of the day, you still have control. So how are you any different from the people you claim to be fighting against?" This was supposed to be the moment she regained control, The moment Musk was forced to acknowledge his own contradictions. But once again, his response was not what anyone expected. "They control what you're allowed to see," he said, his voice measured. "I simply allow you to see everything, the good, the bad, and the uncomfortable. And I trust people to think for themselves." That was the moment. The moment when the conversation stopped being about Musk and became about something much bigger. The host had come here to challenge his actions, to force him to defend his decisions. But now, it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about who decides what people are allowed to know, who gets to control the flow of information, and more importantly, why people had become so comfortable letting someone else make that decision for them. The host could feel it slipping, the balance of power in the interview. She had started this conversation in control, leading the questions, directing the narrative. But now, Musk had forced her to be the one justifying her position. The conversation was no longer about his influence. It was about theirs. And for the first time, she realized she wasn't sure she had a good answer. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut through. The host could feel it, the subtle but undeniable shift that had taken place. She had started this interview believing she was in control, believing that she would be the one steering the conversation. But Musk had done something she hadn't expected. He had taken every question meant to corner him and turned it into a question of his own, one that forced everyone watching to rethink their assumptions. She wasn't ready to back down. If anything, this only made her more determined. She had spent years mastering the art of the tough interview, pushing powerful figures to admit their faults, exposing contradictions, demanding accountability. She wasn't about to let Musk walk away without answering for his own power. Her voice was sharp now, cutting straight to the point. "You talk about free speech, Elon, but let's be honest, your version of free speech still puts you in charge. You own one of the most influential social platforms in the world. You decide what policies are in place. You choose who gets banned and who doesn't. So tell me, what makes you any different from the very elites you criticize? The ones you claim are controlling the narrative." The audience sat on edge, waiting. This was the moment. This was the question that was supposed to make him stumble, to force him to confront the contradiction in his own words. But Musk didn't flinch. He didn't shift uncomfortably in his chair or scramble for an answer. Instead, he simply looked at the host with the same calm intensity he had maintained from the very beginning. "They control what you're allowed to see," he said slowly, letting each word land with purpose. "I simply allow you to see everything, the good, the bad, and the uncomfortable." The room went silent. The host opened her mouth to respond, but Musk wasn't finished. "The truth does not fear scrutiny," he continued, his voice steady but firm. "Only lies need censorship." A ripple went through the audience. It wasn't loud, but it was noticeable. Some people leaned forward, their expressions shifting as they processed what he had just said. Others exchanged glances, murmuring to each other. And then there were those who simply sat there, stunned into silence. The host felt it too, a weight settling over the conversation. She had expected Musk to defend himself, to argue his position, to try to justify why he made the decisions he did. But instead, he had done something far more powerful. He had made the audience question something deeper, something bigger than just him. She forced herself to maintain her composure. She had to regain control. She had to push back. "So you're saying there should be no regulation at all?" she asked, her voice sharp, pressing him for a direct answer. "That people should just be able to say whatever they want, with no consequences? That misinformation, hate speech, dangerous rhetoric, none of it should be controlled?" Musk tilted his head slightly, as if genuinely considering her words. Then he leaned forward just a little, his eyes locked onto hers. "I'm saying that people should be given the chance to think for themselves," he said. "Because when you take away their ability to question, when you decide for them what's true and what isn't, you aren't protecting them. You're controlling them." Another murmur spread through the audience, this time louder. The host could feel it slipping again, that tight grip she had on the direction of the interview loosening more and more. But she couldn't let it happen. She took a deep breath, steadied herself. "Elon, that sounds noble in theory," she countered, keeping her voice controlled, professional. "But the reality is, not everyone is going to think critically. Not everyone is going to take the time to verify information, to filter out lies from the truth. Some people will believe whatever they're told, and that can be dangerous. So again, I ask, don't you have a responsibility to stop harmful information from spreading? For the first time, Musk let out the smallest hint of a smile. Not arrogance, not mockery, just the look of someone who had been waiting for that exact question. Who decides what's harmful? He asked simply. The host blinked. Musk leaned back again, letting the silence stretch just long enough before he continued. Because if history has taught us anything, it's that the people who claim to be protecting you from harmful information are usually the ones with the most to hide. The audience reacted again, some nodding, some looking visibly conflicted. The host felt her heart rate pick up. She had been in this position before, interviewing politicians, CEOs, world leaders. She had faced tough opponents, people skilled at dodging questions, deflecting blame. But this was different. Musk wasn't dodging. He was engaging in a way that made it nearly impossible to pin him down. She had one more move left, a final attempt to regain control. So what happens when you become the one with the most power? She asked, her voice dropping slightly, adding weight to the question. What happens when you become the person people trust blindly? When your influence shapes the way millions of people think? What happens if one day you are the very thing you're warning against? The audience went completely silent. Even those who had been murmuring stopped. It was the kind of question that couldn't be brushed aside. Musk held her gaze for a long moment. Then, finally, he spoke. That's a question I ask myself every day. The host blinked. The audience held their breath. Musk's voice was quieter now, but no less firm. The difference between me and the people I criticize isn't that I don't have power, he said. It's that I invite people to question me, to challenge me. The day I stop allowing that, the day I start silencing those who disagree with me, that's the day I've lost my way. The host had nothing. No quick comeback, no sharp counterpoint. She sat there, the weight of his words pressing down on the room. The silence stretched longer than it should have. And then, slowly, the show's producer gave the signal. The interview was over. But the conversation? That was just beginning. The silence in the studio was unlike anything before. It wasn't the tense kind of silence that came from an argument or a heated exchange. It was deeper, heavier. The kind of silence that settles in when something truly profound has just been said. The host had thrown her final strike, her last chance to turn the tide of the conversation back in her favor. Elon, she had asked, her voice steady but carrying the weight of everything that had been discussed. What if one day you become the very thing you warn us about? For the first time in the entire interview, Musk didn't respond right away. He didn't rush to defend himself, didn't attempt to outmaneuver the question. He simply sat there, his expression unreadable, as if considering the weight of the question just as much as the audience was. And then, finally, he spoke. That's a question I ask myself every day. The host blinked. The audience barely moved. Musk leaned forward slightly, his voice quieter now but carrying more weight than anything he had said before. The difference between me and the people I criticize isn't that I don't have power, he said. It's that I invite people to question me, to challenge me. The day I stop allowing that, the day I start silencing those who disagree with me, that's the day I've lost my way. It was over. There was nothing more to say, nothing left to argue. The host, known for her sharp rebuttals and relentless questioning, found herself without a response. She had spent the entire interview trying to put Musk on the defensive, trying to expose a flaw, a contradiction, a weakness. But now, in this final moment, she realized something unexpected. He wasn't fighting to prove himself right. He was fighting to remind people to think. The silence stretched. Some in the audience shifted in their seats. Others sat completely still, as if absorbing something they hadn't expected to feel. Even those who had been skeptical of Musk from the beginning were now reconsidering, not necessarily because they agreed with him, but because he had made them question things they had never questioned before. The host took a slow breath, regaining her composure. She wasn't someone who liked to lose. But this wasn't a loss in the traditional sense. This wasn't about who won the argument or who looked stronger in the debate. This was something much bigger, something that stretched far beyond the walls of this studio. For the first time that night, she gave a small nod, not of defeat, but of understanding. She turned toward the camera, addressing the millions of people watching from their screens. "Tonight," she said, her voice steady, "we didn't just have an interview. We had a conversation that I think we'll all be thinking about for a long time." Musk said nothing. He didn't need to. And just like that, the interview was over. The cameras stopped rolling. The lights dimmed. But the conversation? That was just beginning. The studio sat in a heavy silence, the weight of the conversation still lingering in the air. The interview was over, but it didn't feel like an ending. It felt like something had shifted, like something deeper had been uncovered, something that couldn't be neatly wrapped up with a final statement or a closing remark. Musk had walked away, leaving behind a question that no one in that room could ignore. The host, usually so quick with her words, had nothing left to say. She had come prepared to challenge him, to expose him, to make him answer for the power he held. And yet, by the end, it wasn't just about him anymore. It was about all of us. This wasn't just an interview. It was a wake-up call, a reminder that questioning everything is the only way to find the truth. For years, people had trusted what they were told, accepted the narratives handed to them, believing that the world was neatly divided between what was right and what was wrong. But tonight, that illusion had cracked. Tonight, millions of people had been forced to ask themselves something they might have never considered before. Who decides what we believe? Now, that question isn't for the host, or for Musk, or for anyone on that stage. It's for you. What do you think? Was Musk right? Or is the truth more complicated? Is he a visionary fighting for open dialogue? Or is he just another powerful figure shaping the world in his own image? Is free speech truly about letting people decide for themselves? Or does it come with a responsibility that can't be ignored? The debate isn't over. It's just getting started. Leave a comment below. Share your thoughts. Agree or disagree, your voice matters. And if this conversation made you think, if it challenged you in any way, don't forget to like this video so more people can be part of this discussion. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because this is just one of many conversations that need to be had. The screen fades to black, but the words still echo. The conversation doesn't end here. It's just beginning.